Program settings. Hello dear friends! Before we continue our journey through Photoshop, let's customize it for ourselves. Of course, there are some settings that are set in the program by default. But also, we are free to use and make the program to our needs as possible. So, open the program and start. The options we need are in the menu. Edit, Preferences. Here we can choose General, and we have a window with the default settings. Let's look at them in order. The first thing we see is a color palette, and the Adobe color palette is offered. There is also a Windows option here, but of course the program works well with its own colors. So we leave what we have now. The next parameter is very interesting. It's the HUD color palette. Let's see what it is. There are several options here. So I choose a color scale and click on OK. This parameter is responsible for how the color selection will be reflected when working with a brush. In order to see this, you need to select the brush tool, then press the Alt plus Shift key combination, the right mouse button, and hold them. You see, we have a scale like this. I'm holding down the right mouse button, but at the same time I've already stopped to press Alt plus Shift. So I can choose the appropriate color in this way, and the scale can be larger or smaller. Let's leave it and come back again to Preferences General, and we find a color scale. As I said, it can be small, medium, but the color wheel and color tone wheel are a little different. For example, look at color wheel. We hold down Alt plus Shift plus the right mouse button, and here we have a color wheel, in which we can choose colors as we want. While working, it is very convenient to switch to color selection. And the next option that we have here is the color tone wheel. Let's choose it. Click on OK. Alt plus Shift plus right mouse button, and look, I can move and choose the color I need. And at the same time, you can pay attention to the changes of the color of the square, which determines the main color of Photoshop, or the upper square on the toolbar. We will talk about this in the next lessons. But remember that you can choose a color this way. So I left the color tone wheel. You can choose what you like best, at least at first glance. We can change it later. The next parameter that we will consider is image interpolation. Interpolation is a way to transform an image when zooming it in and out, when resizing it. Here we can choose the option that is better to maintain quality for the main operations that we perform. Well, for example, Bicubics Sharper, best for zooming out, is more suitable in cases where you have to zoom out the image, which actually happens much more often than image zooming in. But I think the best option is Bicubic Automatic. This parameter answers most requests, so I choose it. Next, we have other parameters. It don't greatly affect the operation of the program. In general, if you check all the boxes, you will not see any significant changes. The only thing you would like to note is that the checkmark Clipboard Expert means that Photoshop documents can be exported to some other programs with layers saved. And if you uncheck this box, then this function will not be implemented. Next, I want to draw your attention to the Recorder All Messages option. I'm sure you know that sometimes programs gives us hints about some actions, and if you don't want to see them, these messages will no longer be shown. So you can uncheck the box and this message will no longer be shown. But if suddenly you want to see the hints pop up again, then you can click Recorder All Messages. As for the Reset Settings on Exit option, this means that you can set the settings for one time, for one session of your work. And after that, the next time you work, the settings will return to default. The next point in the Preferences menu is the interface, and here everything is clearly intuitively. The upper part of the window is about working with the appearance of the interface, and as you can see, now we have a medium gray, but we can change the color of the interface, for example, to this. As you can see, it has changed immediately. Let's leave it, because I think this is one of the most suitable options. There are no interesting options left except for the interface language. English and some other languages are also shown in the program, and then you can choose what is most preferable for you. Let's move on. Workspace. Here we leave all settings as they are. The only point is the option Restore Default Workspaces. This applies to those cases if you did something wrong with your workspace. Do you remember talking about it last time? So, if you decide to restore everything as it was, then in this case you choose this option. Let's move on to the tools. There are simple hints and tips, and there is a function Use Advanced Hints. Simple hints, it's when you hold the cursor over some tool or option and a small yellow window pops up in which is written about the operation of this or that tool or option. Now I close the window so that it can be seen. For example, I hold the cursor over the brush tool, and an animated window appears that shows how this tool works. And at the first stages of getting acquainted with a program, it can be useful, interesting, exciting, but over time it can be boring. By the way, if you suddenly want to learn more, you can click on here, find out how, and then you'll have a training panel where you can get acquainted with the work of this tool in detail. So, let's return to our tips. If you decide that you are already familiar with everything and these windows are bothering you, you can turn them off. And I will go back to the Preferences menu, Tools, and see these animated hints. You can uncheck this box wherever you want. I will check it anyway because I still like to consider these hints, although I'm familiar with all the elements. The next parameter is Scale by Hue. What does it give? I have already checked this mark, although it is not checked by default, so I click on OK and show what it is about. For example, I want to zoom in an image, and with this option enabled, it's enough to scroll mouse wheel forward and the image zooms in. If I scroll mouse wheel back, the image will be zoomed out. That is, it seems to me this is must-have. This parameter should be enabled. The rest of the parameters that was set by the developers can be left as they are, because this is in general the most optimal option for work. And we move on to the change history. By default, this option is disabled. It is needed when you are doing some work in which all your steps should be recorded. For example, you want to confirm your autoship. If we check this mark, we'll be enabled to choose in what format the reports on your actions will be saved. I uncheck it, because I don't need it. Let's move on to file processing. Here, in principle, you can also leave it without any changes, but sometimes it is useful to use some thumbnails of documents. That is, when you look at the Explorer, you can see the information about the file. Here you can choose wherever to save or not, or to save from time to time. We leave the settings without changes. Next, export. Here all the settings are optimal and don't change them, but go to productivity. It is worth to note the memory usage should be at least 70%. We leave it as it is. If a slider is shifted to the left, then it's worth returning it to a value like this. Somewhere 2 or 3 of the stripe should be blue. The next important parameter is the action history. That is, how many steps you can return in the history palette. This is a palette in which all your steps are recorded within the specified number from your last action, and you can, if necessary, go back a certain number of steps. This is actually very important, and the number 50 is probably one of the most optimal. And we move on to the next section, working disks. Here we are talking about which disks RAM will be used when processing your files. Most likely, you initially have a checkmark opposite C drive on which the program is installed. In many cases, this is not enough. For example, in my case, if I leave a checkmark only on C drive, then the computer will slow down. So I prefer to use the resources of D drive as well. Sometimes it is recommended to check the box only on D drive, in order not to overload RAM for C drive, on which the program is installed, when it is debatable, because your need of enabling or disabling this function depends on the power of your computer. If you have an ordinary computer, then check the boxes opposite C and D drives. Next, let's go to the section cursors. Here, in general, it is clear that you can choose different cursors. You'll use these advanced functions when you have a lot of experience working with a program, because you understand some unique nuances that you need. And then, probably, you change something here to do what you specifically want. We leave it unchanged. Go to Transparency and Ink Coverage. Perhaps you know that transparency in Photoshop is displayed like this chess, and the appearance of this chess, these squares, can be changed. That is, you can change the color, you can change the size of the grid. You would like to say that these are mostly decorative things that you can change as you want. Here you can make not only a gray grid, but also the red one. Our next option is units of measurement and rulers. I think we should use more familiar parameters. For example, it is better to use millimeters for rulers. What about the text when we set its size? We can immediately understand how it will look at the scale of our document. To do this, we use pixels. You can always go back to this parameter if you want to change it to do something else. We leave the default resolution of new documents as it is, because this is a generally common resolution and this is the best option. Then there are the following parameters: git grid and fragments. Here we set the colors of various auxiliary elements that will help us align some elements of our document. And here you can change their color. For example, it is necessary when you have a git grid of such a bright blue color and the document itself has the same color. You simply don't see the git grids on this background. In this case, it makes sense to change the color of git grids or any other parameters in order not to prevent you from work. External modules. Here we don't need to change parameters, because here in general we don't have anything worth changing. Let's go to the text. Here, in the same way, everything is fine. It is clear if you read what it is about, and we leave it by default too. What about 3D? Here too, we leave all the parameters by default. We will talk in more detail about the options that are indicated here in the lessons where we will consider 3D. We will leave the technology views by default. So we have set all the general preferences that affect the quality of our work. Perhaps you'll want to change something else later. But for now, we click on OK. Some settings do not change immediately, such as the interface color. If you have changed the language, you should restart the program to see changes. We installed all the necessary settings, and now it is convenient and comfortable for you to work. From time to time, as you need to change something, you will return to these settings and change them. The main thing for now is to remember what and where can be changed, and change your settings that I recommended to you. This is your homework. AIM School was with you. We are waiting for you in the next lessons. Goodbye.